right, thank everyone for coming out. Before we start the meeting, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone please stand. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a prayer by the Honorable 4-4 Councilman William C. Marshall.
Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless this meeting and bless our deliberations tonight. Thank you for allowing the residents to get here safe and allow them to get home safe as they get what they need to get tonight. We thank you for just our lives today, that you spared us one more day, that we can say we were here and we did what we had to do for the people of our city. Thank you for all you do and all you are. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, just a few housekeeping items for members of the public. We thank you for coming out to hear and get educated on this very important issue towards the city and our finances. Just the format that we want to go, I'm going to open up with a brief statement, then we'll hear from the bond counsel, financial advisors, and Tim Cunningham, who is the Director of Local Governmental Services for the state of New Jersey, which under the Municipal Stabilization Act has final say over the city of Atlantic City. We're going to then, after the presentations, we're going to have it like a council meeting, but no action will be taken. As many of you know, this action will be deliberated next Wednesday, at the regular council meeting. So what we're going to do is we're going to entertain. You'll have 3 minutes to speak and or 2 questions, whatever comes first. We'll follow that same format. So if someone has a sign-in sheet, I know I dismissed the clerk's office. Well, we just ask whoever would like to speak when you come up, state your name for the record. The reason why we're here, for those who don't know, I'm Marty Small, City Council President, City of Atlantic City, and the Chairman of Revenue and Finance. We had this issue with the bond. Just to give you a little backstory, and State can go into it a little more. Back in 2015, this is back when we had the emergency manager, the city was urged not to pay pension and health benefits to the state of New Jersey. If you remember, during that time, we were dealing with like a 52% tax increase combined with the 2 years. So we had to pay the pension and health. The taxes would have been even more astronomical. This is around the time when we had the protests and various civic groups outside of Creta protesting. So what they allowed us to do is, kick the proverbial can down the road until things got better, and the due date was 2018, which we are in 2018 now. On second reading, we decided to postpone it because we wanted to figure out what the appetite from the new state government was. Some people thought maybe for political reasons that they would forgive, wishful thinking. But the bottom line is the city of Atlantic City owes the money. After that meeting, several civic association presidents reached out to me. We communicated, via email and on the phone. And I told them that I attended that budget meeting. It's a weekly meeting on a Friday. I was on the phone, and we heard that the state of New Jersey, who Sheila Oliver is the new DCA commissioner, who is Mr. Cunningham's boss, said that the state will not forgive it, and Atlantic City owes its, we have to pay that money back. So we're here today, and they presented us with 2 options. One option was to bond it via the Municipal Qualified Bond Act, which, the city's credit rating isn't that great, so we leverage certain assets to be able to bond, or, which none of us want, is to raise taxes. I think the amount would have been $16 million this year, and each resident would have had to pay in north of $787, which I'm sure none of us want. So this council is always, going to do the right thing and, make sound decisions for the residents. And what I wanted to do was gather the public, before the council meeting, before the council vote next week. So when next week come up, everyone will be, either for or against, the situation, but at least you have a chance to be heard, you have a chance to be educated, and we can move forward together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Cunningham.
I'm going to step off to the side and apologize for giving my back. Council President, I come here tonight as a very proud New York Giants fan.
You're in the wrong place.
See, I wasn't going to go in. I'm going to handle business. And
I started it. Let me be a little more serious. I do come here very proudly tonight. I come here very proudly tonight with a team of the city's professionals and state professionals who have worked very hard to develop a solution which I truly think is in the best interest of the Atlantic City residents and taxpayers. Over the last several weeks, we have worked and we have had an opportunity to talk to the mayor, the council president, and others about a pretty unique solution to a large problem. I think the council president is correct when he talks a little bit about where we were or where the city was. And I say we because I feel so invested in trying to develop solutions for the city's financial issues. Where we were in 2015 was a city that had not just a budget crisis, a liquidity crisis. The city simply did not have enough cash to pay its bills. As a result of that liquidity crisis, the choice was to either raise taxes additionally, even more than it was already significantly done, or develop other solutions. And one of those solutions was, as was stated, to defer the payment of the city's pension and health care bills. When the legislature drafted a two-part solution to include the Stabilization and Recovery Act and the Casino Pilot Law, that missed payment, or those missed payments, were specifically referenced in that legislation. And it contemplated them being paid back starting in 2018 over a 5-year period. So that's the mission that we've worked together, the city administration, the state officials, and the professionals, to develop an idea on how that could be done in the best way possible for the city. I'm joined tonight by Jen Edwards and Scott Beal from Acacia. Acacia is the City of Atlantic City's financial advisor. Steve Perlman also joins us. Steve is the city's bond counsel. And John Lloyd is a tax partner at the CSG firm. And John really understands a concept we're going to talk about tonight as it relates to casino pilots and the investment alternative tax. I'm sorry, I should be more clear. So Scott, can we start with the first slide? I don't think that any discussion about where we are today, thank you very much, can really begin without understanding where the city had been.
We got a clapper.
Looks like it's warming up. Well, in the interest of time, I'll keep going. It's no secret that the city experienced a historic decline in its rateable base. We saw a net taxable value in the city, the chart up on the right. We saw from 2010 to 2016 the tax base decreased from nearly $20.5 billion to $6.5 billion. When I speak publicly in front of various groups of CFOs and tax collectors and Treasurers Association, and I give that statistic, I often hear an audible gasp from the crowd. That is historic and it's unprecedented. At the same time, the city well knows there were numerous casino closures, declining gaming revenues. Yet, as the chart on the bottom shows, appropriations continue to rise. the city was faced with numerous tax appeal, not just settlements, but judicial decrees saying what the city had to repay certain large taxpayers, the casinos in particular. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we worked together to start to come up with some resolution of these issues. Well, I think first was the legislature. The legislature developed a mechanism where the casinos were taken out of the tax base and paid pilots ostensibly to prevent the volatility associated with appeals. And it allowed the city to have some stability and forecasting ability over a significant 10-year period. At the same time, Borgata was owed $158 million, at least that was the tax appeal exposure, and I might argue that it was even higher than that. And because Borgata actually had a judicial settlement, a judicial a decree of what they were owed, they stopped paying taxes to the city of Atlantic City. $7.5 million every quarter they withheld from the city, which caused true liquidity issues. The solution there, this city council, along with the state, the amount was settled for $72 million. And I give credit to John Lloyd for that settlement. I was in negotiations personally with Borgata, and I did not get anywhere near that number. Once we brought a professional on who understood that world and spoke their language, we were very successful in negotiating a settlement that was nearly 50 cents on the dollar. Once Borgata settled, it allowed us to move forward with the other major outstanding tax appeals. And there were numerous casinos in that. And there you can see it was $137 million in exposure there. And once again, that was negotiated down to nearly 50 cents on the dollar through John's efforts. So two of the major issues were handled through the issuance of qualified debt, which allowed the city some breathing room. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So I've often come in these chambers and I've heard from both the council and the public, well, what's your plan? What has the state done for us? And at times, I've been made to feel just a little bit unwelcome in this room. But I think by now, I've demonstrated my commitment to the city, and I've shown how I've really tried to work collaboratively to develop solutions. But I didn't come empty-handed. Mayor Gilliam also often jokes with me if I brought a check with me. And I always tease him and say, no, it must be in my other suit. But the fact of the matter is, I have brought a check to the city of Atlantic City. The state of New Jersey is the payor of that check. And this chart shows that since 2014, the state has significantly ramped up the amount of direct aid provided to the city of Atlantic City. $13 million in 2014, another $13 million in 15. Then, for the first time ever, we gave Contra, which is the type of state aid that can be used as security for qualified debt. The numbers continue to grow to an aggregate number of $52 million in 16, up to $54 million last year. It's pretty significant growth. Also, the footnote that most people can't see at the bottom is that we also gave $20 million to the Atlantic City School District in 2015. I believe that the state now funds approximately, in excess, I should say, of 40% of the city of Atlantic City's budget. Can we go to the next slide, Scott? Thank you. But, as was stated earlier, when we tried to close the 2015 calendar year gap, there were several steps taken. Number one, operational cost reductions. The cost of running city government was necessarily reduced. We increased state aid at the same time, what I was just talking about. The legislature directed, or I should say redirected, funds used to fund the Atlantic City Alliance to the city's benefit. And lastly, the decision was made, a hard decision, not one taken lightly, but the decision was made to defer payment on pension and health care liabilities. And those amounts were $20.3 million for pensions, for health and 18.6 for pension, for a total of $37.2 million in deferred payments. That number has climbed. That number has climbed because of the statutory interest rate associated with that. The city now owes $47.1 million. $25 million now to the state pension system, and I've been asked for the statutory site and whether or not the state can waive that amount, that 10% interest rate. The statutory site is NJSA 43:15A 81 for PERS, for the Public Employee Retirement System, and 43:16A-15 for the Police and Fire Retirement System. 43:15A 81, 43:16A 15. So I've been asked whether or not the state can waive that amount. Interestingly, I asked this question in 2015. And when the legislature was drafting the Stabilization and Recovery Bill and the pilot bill, I tried to get language in there authorizing the treasurer to have the discretion to amend, lower, or waive that amount. I was unsuccessful. That is a statutory requirement. On the other hand, the $21.6 million payable to the state healthcare system for benefits has an interest rate at 2%. So as I said before, the state is obligated to repay these deferred obligations over a 5-year period in 2018. Conventional thinking would be to take those amounts and spread them evenly over the next 5 years and incorporate them as part of the city's budget. And let me be very clear what I mean by that. The city would need to budget for those payments, and that money would come from the taxpayers of the city of Atlantic City. The impact would be $16 million in the calendar year 18 budget, which would equate to a tax increase of well over $700 on the average Atlantic City assessed home of $140,000. We've developed a better solution. We've developed a solution that calls for the use of redirected investment alternative taxes, which are payments that are made available to the city from the casinos. And what I'd like to do is ask John Lloyd to talk a little more particularly about that, and then we'll have Steve talk about the transaction, and we will explain to you why we've come up with a alternative that spares the city taxpayers from picking up this expense. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening. So the so-called pilot statute that most of you are familiar with, reading about it or hearing about it, sometimes is mistakenly thought to only deal with the manner in which the casinos were to be assessed and taxed, if you will, over a 10-year period. So one thing about the Casino Pilot Act that's important to note is it was a companion statute that went along with the Municipal Stabilization and Recovery Act, right, which was the overarching statutory law, right, that has been implemented over the last year and a half almost now. So the Casino Pilot Act was a companion piece to that, which primarily initially talked about, well, what might be a way that, assuming we were able to accomplish what we were able to accomplish in resolving what was outstanding with the casinos, all of the so-called legacy costs, all of the costs that were in existence from either successful appeals that they had in hand or appeals that were pending, and exposure, significant exposure resulted to the city. Once that got resolved through the settlements and then the funding of those settlements through bond offerings, how might we avoid that happening again? It's the concept behind the 10-year statute. So it was to create a mechanism to assess the tax and tax the casinos in a more stabilized way, fixed amount. A pot of money that they share and pay. $120 million was the first year in, and that pot increases if the casino gaming revenue increases, which by way of example it has done in the first year of its operation. and the casino pilot payment goes to $130 million for the 2018 year. So that piece of the Casino Stabilization Act is one part, right? But there was another two very other important things right below it. One of which was that aside from that going on, there was the law redirected, if you will, a tax the casinos were paying already, independent of this, for years, decades actually. In 1984 it came into existence. It was called the Investment Alternative Tax. It's just simply another tax the casinos paid. It was directed initially more toward Casino Redevelopment Authority, CREDA, and other state funds. The Casino Pilot Act, again for the 10-year period, did a further step in saying that once that money, which initially, the tax is paid by the casinos, that initially goes to the retiring of certain bonds that CRDA has outstanding, right? So there's debt service. What's left from that goes back into the Casino Stabilization Act, and what is remaining for the city after those credits, if you will, or amounts are taken off the top, there is a revenue stream that comes from the IATs to the city pursuant to this act for 10 years. But the act says specifically that money stream coming into the city can only be used for debt service. It can't be used for salaries or operational costs or any other reason. The idea was we're going to change this, we're going to shift this stream to the city for 10 years. We want to make sure it's targeted towards debt service to help the city retire some of its debt. So those are the first two bullet points. So you have a redirection of money that casinos are already paying into the state to the city specifically for debt service. Now what's relevant for what you're talking about tonight is that, pardon my back, I'm always sensitive to standing people in the back, but so I'm going to pivot more to the voters, or to the citizens of Atlantic City. So the third piece that's important to understand, and Steve will talk in a second about how this fits into how this proposed bond is being structured, right? There's a projection that the state has done. The Division of Gaming Enforcement has a raft of professionals and accountants that deal with projections of casino payments and streams, and the debt service that money has to go to first with the CRDA bonds. And the projections rolling forward are that, especially after the 4th or 5th year of the Casino Act, the Pilot Act's existence, there will be a spike in available remaining IAT monies, right? It basically is a function of other debt obligations, other bonds being paid off. And once that's done, the money that has been paid by the casinos in this IAT will be freed up, so to speak. So by the time that you're in about halfway, the debt service schedule and projected debt service schedule, the time to pay back the bond we're talking about tonight will roughly coincide with the freeing up of more of that casino redirected tax money to try to assist with the major amount of the debt service created by this bond. So in summary, it's an act that is specifically targeted to the city's, helping the city's debt. It is going to be an amount that is going to spike after about the 4th or 5th year of the Pilot Act, and the goal is to try to link that spike up into the payment, if you will, a payment stream for the bond that we're talking about to retire his pension and health deferral. That's my piece.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Steve Perlman and Miranda, bond counsel to the city. I'm actually going to direct my comments to the council because that's just the way I was raised, but don't take offense. I apologize. This is actually a restructuring. So far we've been talking about the pension bond, but you really need to understand what's going on in a larger context, because these IATs are projected by the state, an independent Division of Gaming and Enforcement, thank you, DGE, to be so large, the number that is coming, that it will be available to pay debt service for town bonds, to not just cover this 2018 bond issue, but actually, and you'll see the numbers in a few minutes, Jen has some slides, actually in the last 4 years, 2022 through 2026, they're actually projected to cover the debt service on these 2018 bonds all of your prior bonds that have been issued with the state qualified bond program, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, and all of the bonds that are city general obligation bonds that are not issued under the qualified programs. In other words, all of your debt. For 2022 through 2026, there are enough projected IATs, what John just spoke about, to cover 100% of your debt service. So this is not just about the 18 bonds and how are you going to pay for them. This is about when they changed the statute to say, Atlantic City, you get IATs when you did not before. The casinos got them, CRETA got them, you now get them, but you only get them for debt service. That was the goal that enabled the professional team to say, okay, how do we maximize that? Not just to deal with your 2015 deferral, because you have existing debt and a significant amount of it. So how can we capture as many IATs as possible and pay off as many bonds as possible? So it was that mantra that we put together the program that we're offering that hopefully you will vote on next week. So how did we do that? What we did was we set up an independent trust agreement with an independent bank, and we are directing the state treasurer, who actually captures the IATs. They don't get paid to us, they get paid by the casinos to the state treasurer. And we're actually advising, directing the state treasurer to pay that money over to this bank for deposit in a trust agreement. And that bank acts like a traffic cop. And what that bank will do is they'll look at all of your qualified bond debt service and all of your non-qualified bond debt service for the next 2 years. And they will allocate monies to each of those bond issues for a 2-year period going forward. And because we did not want to let a dime go by, and because you heard me say there's actually more money in those years 22 through 26, we actually set another account to capture any excess money to cover any potential debt service beyond the amount that's due in the next 2 years. Why? Because we did not want to let a dime go back unused to casinos. We wanted to use all of it for the benefit of Atlantic City. So this trust agreement with this independent bank sets up a flow of money, and the bank gets directly ordered, instructed as to how to apply that money. Basically, they cover the next 2 years worth of debt service, and they'll pay the qualified bonds first in that year, then they'll pay the non-qualified bonds in that year, and then the same for the following year. That's what the mechanic that we've set up does. An obvious question that would come up is, I understand why you would stop the bleeding of a 10% obligation. Why would you stop a 2% obligation? You're not going to issue bonds at 2%. And the answer is what I just said. If the bonds are being paid from the IATs, who's not paying them? The taxpayer. The casinos are effectively paying. If we did not do this, if we did not add in the healthcare portion, the portion that's accruing at 2%, who would be paying? The taxpayers. So this maximizes the ability to have the casinos pay as much of your existing debt, including this new debt, as possible. Now, you see the third bullet say this is a priority of funding of bonds. You are still in number 3. You are still legally and technically on the hook. If for whatever reason those gaming revenues do not show up, priority number 1. If for any reason the qualified revenues, which is in effect Comtra and the energy tax that you saw on an earlier chart, in English, state aid from the state, if that doesn't show up, the third item, the city is on the hook. Let's go back to the second item. That program has been around since the mid-70s. A number of communities across the state have taken advantage of that program. There has never been, and I've been doing this over 30 years, there has never been a failed payment by the state under the qualified bond program. And therefore, you get rated when you go to the market based solely on that. So while legally and technically, I can't sit here and say, number 3 will never get hit, I can stand up here and say, in the 40-year plus that the program has been around, the towns that are underneath the qualified bond program have never been assessed to pay debt service. Now, why do you need the first bullet over the second bullet? Because if the state's paying, well, the city's not paying, so why do you care? Here's why you care. You want as much to go into that first bullet, because when the state pays you out of state aid, guess what they do? They reduce the state aid payable to the city. The mayor got that when we were talking about this. So therefore, I am back to, we set this mechanism up to not just pay these bonds, but to pay all of your outstanding debt by utilizing every penny of that investment alternative tax as we can. And I think when Jen comes up and shows you the charts, and you actually see the numbers and see it graphically represented, you see that we have maximized the use of that casino revenue for your benefit.
Good evening. I am going to take a different approach, and I'm going to walk up here because I want to point out the various points on the graph. This chart represents the city's outstanding and projected debt service. The point all the way on the bottom here in the light peach is your non-QBA existing debt service. So what does that mean? That's all of your pre-existing general obligation debt that does not have a pledge for state aid. The middle level here, the medium peach, is your existing qualified bonds that are already issued under the Qualified Bond Act and being paid directly by the state under the state appropriation for qualified revenues. Here, this is the proposed 2018 pension bonds. How we structured this transaction, like Mr. Perlman said, was we tried to correspond the payments with when the inflow of IAT payments would be coming in. Under the MSRA, you have 5 years to pay back the pension payment. Here in the bond, we're able to extend it out to where the IATs are going to be ending 10 years. So in 2026 now, we'll be issuing an 8-year bond. So you're able to lower those annual payments versus paying them out over 5 years. In addition, we've kept the payments smaller here in the next few years when we have less IAT payments. It's projected that in 2022, IATs will be much greater, and then you'll be able to afford these higher payments. Scott, if you flip to the next chart, you'll be able to see the impact. The underlying gray is all the chart that you saw on the following page, which was all the existing and proposed debt. This blue right here is the IATs. We're expecting them to be close to 40 million come 2022. This is why it's most prudent for these proposed bonds to start paying higher levels of principal during the years that we have IAT inflows. Anything that you see above this chart is the excess state aid that comes in because you're paying debt service with IATs. So all this additional aid is flowing directly to the city's general fund budget once debt service is paid. Yeah, that's it.
Excuse me, we're going to open it up for the public to speak in an orderly fashion. Mr. Green. Thank you.
I do notice that some people have taken, I've seen people writing notes and taking pictures of the presentation. This is a document, the PowerPoint, that we will gladly share. That PDF will be, I guess Jason sent to your attention, and we'll get it posted on the website so everyone can see it. Before I go into the summary, there's just kind of one a concept that Steve talked about that I wanted to hone in on a little bit. The legislation talks about the use of IATs for, quote, debt service, unquote. If it just said debt, I would be able to say to Mr. Stinson, use these IATs to pay the gas bill, pay payroll, pay your insurance, anything I would consider a debt. But because the legislation contemplated debt service, it connotes some type of a bond product. So we came down for a conference a couple months ago now, and we sat in the back room, and it was Steve's first foray into this, and I've worked with Steve in the past, so I knew what to expect. I said, Steve, I have this idea that John Lloyd and Jen and I have been talking about to use IATs to kind of fund this. And he looked at me and he said, I don't think he can do it. And he went through all the reasons why he couldn't do it. And I turned to John and I winked and I said, give him a week, he'll be back. And he came back and said, okay, I think I came up with something. And since that time, I can't tell you how many meetings we've had and how this has evolved to something that I think we're all very proud of. So in summary, what I wanted to say is this. I believe with this solution, the city is approaching a balanced calendar year 18 budget with no tax increase. There are obviously variables that remain to be seen. Governor Murphy has yet to present his first state budget, but with the picture that I now have in front of me, I believe a balanced budget with no tax increase is very likely with this scenario. When I say the last of the big three, I have often in my mind compartmentalized to say there were three large financial issues that are hanging over the heads of Atlantic City's residents. The first was the Borgata debt, which has been pounded down and financed. The second were the other casino tax appeals, which have been pounded down and financed. And now we're at the point where this 2015 deferral is the last major financial problem that I think we need to solve. It doesn't mean that all is right in the world. There's still a lot of hard work to be done. But these are three very large lingering issues that have troubled me. Use of IATs. I think as John and Steve both spoke about, we've worked to develop a solution where the first line of payment is the redirected casino money, as opposed to the tax money of the residents of Atlantic City. And on next steps, I think all I would like to add there is that City Council will take a vote on second reading of a bond ordinance at its meeting next Wednesday on the 21st. The deal, as contemplated, is structured such that it would likely price and sell at the very end of March. And this is strategic because every month that goes by without a solution to this, the increase is $190,000 a month. And also, I want that pricing and sale to occur immediately after the governor makes his budget address, because that way we can ensure that what Steve talked about, this concept of Contra, which the rating agencies and the dozens of towns that issue qualified debt, that they feel comfortable that there's enough state aid to go around. That'll help us price the deal and get a better rate. At the same time, over these next couple weeks, we will continue to work with the city on developing the calendar year 18 budget. I've said several times tonight, and I will end on this note. Without this solution, I cannot think of a scenario that allows the city to move forward without increasing taxes. I believe that this bond issuance is in the best interest of the city and its residents, and I am committed to not letting an unnecessary tax increase occur. Council President, I will turn the microphone back over. Myself and the team that spoke today will be available to answer questions in the mechanism that in the method that you described.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham and team for your presentation. For those of you who just walked into the room, once again, how we're going to do this is going to be in a similar to the council meeting format, where you will have 3 minutes to discuss. You'll be allowed to ask 2 questions. And I see a lot of you were taking notes. Just so, you know, for the public, I've been getting a lot of questions as the chairman of Revenue and Finance, and, you know, talking through various, you know, constituents throughout the city. And I told you I was gonna ask this, if we can have the total amount of the city's debt, pre-bond and post-bond, so that way everyone will know where we stand, because there's a lot of, you know, numbers going on that aren't realistic. So we could just tell the public before we get into the question and answer. And also I had someone, you know, ask me, and I know we have to wait, because the state is on a fiscal year, we want a calendar year budget for the insertion of transitional aid, which you said was 40 million, right?
I think I said 50, but that was
No.
that was before the Eagles won.
Yeah. No, but in all seriousness, we don't know what that transitional aid figure looks like, so that we can give you a clear snapshot of the financial picture.
Yeah, your financial advisor has that information.
Sure. As of December 31st, 2017, the outstanding debt was $344,609,000 per the annual debt statement filed by the city. This bond offering will be not to exceed $55 million, so that initially gets added to that amount. However, we expect the bond issue to be more in the $50 million range. And that's just simply because we're conservative when we size the transaction. Because of market movements, sometimes bonds are sold at a discount, which raises the amount that you need to borrow. But we anticipate right now that it's going to be around 49-50 million when we head to market. So that would increase you to just below 400 million in outstanding debt.
And we can make that schedule available along with the PowerPoint presentation so the public can see it.
And around 14, 15, we were hovering over close to 5.
Council President, I think maybe a better way to say it is that there was outstanding debt, but then there was unbonded liabilities, and that I think is that's well over $500 million, because you had Borgata and you had the other tax appeals, so they weren't bonded liabilities. So we don't call them debt in the capital context, but obviously in the context of are they owed, are they debt in that context? Absolutely yes.
Well, the Borgata number was always inflated. People talked about the 180 million that we owed. They put that into the debt without it actually being final. When we came in, you know, for the 72 million. That went away.
Well, Borgata's exposure was, you know, John, do you recall what the Borgata judgment itself was?
So the judgment they had was only for the first 2 years, and then they had an option to freeze it. So the judgment itself was in the areas in the mid-60s, if you ran out mid-60 million. But they had 4 more tax years beyond that, not yet reduced to judgment, where their demand and the analysis that went to it led to the projected overall liability of 160, right? And then if you take away and that was higher prior to them not paying in 2016 taxes, which was resolved as well with the negotiation that they began paying immediately.
So, John, I think, and I want to make sure it's on the microphone so it's captured for camera, the exposure for Borgata alone was 186 million. That didn't include the other large tax appeals, which were 137 million in potential exposure, and that would be added on top of the debt, the bonded debt that the city had outstanding. So you're right, in 2015 the number was significantly higher.
But also when we came out of that with the $72 million, the thing that worked in the city's favor is now Borgata's back on the tax rolls, possibly.
Yeah, that was one of the things that John negotiated, which was, again, as I said earlier in my remarks, Borgata was withholding their tax payments. $7.5 million a quarter they weren't paying. That was one of the things that was immediate and non-negotiable on our behalf because we knew the liquidity issues that the city was having. We'll settle the amount, but we have to have that money paid, you know, on a routine basis because we just needed that, the city needed that cash influx.
Okay. All right, thank you. What we're gonna do in an orderly fashion, is we'll just start with the front part of the room. Anyone would like to speak, just please step up to the microphone. State your name for the record, please.
I'm Michael Diamond. What would happen if CRDA funding increases? Would that increase affect IAT monies available for Atlantic City's bonding?
No, we're going to do some of the.
Yeah, go for the microphone, please.
So, no, for the period of time that the Pilot Act is under existence and in effect for 10 years, any new CRD that the IATs cannot be pledged to any new CRDA debt obligations.
They can refund it.
What?
They can refund existing obligations.
It's only existing, and that's what's partly why what gets available to the city, right? Casinos pay to the state. Before what's left to the city comes existing debt that CRDA had, that debt service has to be taken care of by the IATs. Then what's left after that is for the city. And that's why after that debt drops off, the fourth or fifth year in, the IAT monies available to the city increases.
But they can't increase it. CREDA cannot.
There can be no new debt issues during the period of time. They can issue debt, but it's not, the IATs will not be pledged to pay it.
Perfect, thank you.
And I'm John, just for the public and anyone who came in late, can you explain the acronym IAT?
Investment Alternative Tax, it's just one other tax the casinos pay, aside from their corporate tax, aside from their parking tax and room tax. It's a separate tax they pay.
Don't say parking and room tax anymore.
I'm sorry?
Sensitive topic.
Sensitive topic.
Bad words.
I apologize.
But that's from the 1.25%.
Right, and it's an alternative because they can pay straight, all right, they can pay straight, flat straight to the state fund, or they can put it into this other alternative investment fund and they pay 1.25% of, we'll call brick and mortar, the gaming revenue that comes from the actual casinos, and then it's 2.5% of their internet revenue, of their internet gross gaming revenues, all of which is increasing, as you may know, at a higher pace than the brick and mortar.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Joe Rorick. I'm a resident of Atlantic City. I know nothing about the city government, and I think you fellows did a fantastic job presenting this information and showing us about the bond. What I don't understand is all this money is owed to the state of New Jersey by the city of Atlantic City for the pension plan. So why do we have to borrow money to pay this off when it's just the city and the state, my right pocket, my left pocket? Now I'm borrowing money from a third party, then I'm getting banks and bond brokers involved, a fourth party, and paying them fees and interest. Why can't, and I know nothing about government, why can't the state and the city get together and with the same revenue just pay off the debt without involving a bond and without involving banks, brokers, fees, and discounts? Thank you.
It's a tremendous question. And the answer is fairly simple. The pension and healthcare liabilities are not money that's necessarily, I want to be careful how I say this, those monies actually fund the pensions and healthcare benefits. So when these monies get paid to the state treasury, they don't go into the state's general coffers, they go right into the account to make sure that the pension system and the health insurance system are solvent. Now, the distinction that I need to be very clear about is I'm a state employee. So I am in a pension system that is frankly near bankrupt. The local system in the state of New Jersey, the municipalities and the counties, their system is very stable. And the reason their system is very stable is because municipalities and counties have historically and routinely funded the pension system. The state, if you read the headlines, I know you said you're not, active in government, but you can't help but read the headlines in every paper. And the reason why the state's credit rating has deteriorated so much over the past years is because various governors from both parties have borrowed out of the state pension system, thereby decreasing its solvency. The local pension system and health benefits, they have not done that. That has been kept solvent by routine payments. So the state getting that money, all they will do is take that money and pay into the system to make sure that that pension system remains solvent. I hope that answers your question.
Excuse me.
Well,
Excuse me. Listen, we're gonna handle this in a professional and productive way. Side conversations will not be tolerated. Everyone will have their moment to speak. You can agree with what's going on, and you can disagree with what's going on. But we're gonna respect the speaker. People want to get their questions answered, and it won't be no back and forth. Everybody will have the same opportunity. Thank you.
Council President, I want to make a comment. I think that that's a very good point that the speaker brings up, just as a point of fact that I hear you citing the statutes, Mr. Cunningham, and I see them as clearly as you do, but it is interesting that the state crafted unique solutions for Atlantic City. We're the only town in the state that has been taken over. We're the only town in the state that encountered the economic factors that you brought up in your PowerPoint. And the point that we're crafting a unique solution that includes roughly $2 to $3 million worth of third-party costs, regardless of whether we're taking the money from an IAT or from this source or that source. I just find it odd that the state isn't able to craft another unique solution that enables us to work out some type of extended payment plan with how familiar you are with our revenue streams that doesn't squander money, which, I'd rather see it developing the town than going to professional costs, or paying down debt than going to professional costs. So I wanted to get that comment on the record. Thank you.
Next speaker.
If you, no?
No.
Thank you. Harold Strauss, Atlantic City resident. A couple of questions. I know the mayor just went out to Las Vegas with our new governor. And hopefully on the plane ride, maybe there was a conversation about the state in some way or form giving Atlantic City a reduction in the debt, or passing this debt on to the rest of the state of New Jersey people, as we do give the luxury tax and parking tax to the state. Maybe with the new governor and his people, it's a little bit of time to the state give back to Atlantic City, which we've sent them funds for the last 40 years. So I'm not putting you on the spot, Mr. Mayor, but I'm just saying that maybe there can be some kind of quote-unquote reduction in this bond to help out the taxpayers here. And again, bringing up Joe's point, not giving $1 million or $2 million to third party to write up and administer this bond proposal. Thank you.
Just for the record, I don't know if you were here when we started, but that's when we tabled this ordinance at the last meeting, it was with the intent to find out what was the state's pleasure. And they got back to us and said that, the city owes the money and, we have to pay it per, the statutory agreement.
Thank you.
No problem, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Henny Gelfand, Atlantic City resident. I'd like to know what the IATs are used for now.
Okay. John?
Well,
Ma'am, do you have another question? You allow it to. Do you have another one? Or just?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
the IATs, when you say now, I assume before we're talking about the act went into place, like,
I guess it's before I even knew what an IAT was.
right, so
Before today.
it was a payment, a tax, if you will, into the state that was used for funding debt obligations for primarily for CRDA for projects that CRDA did across the state, not just in Atlantic City, to be clear. And it was literally an investment fund to finance, if you will, all of the various activities, some of which in Atlantic City, some of which in Atlantic County, some of which in the rest of the state.
Am I allowed to?
No, ma'am.
We can talk about it.
Yeah, hi, Mike Crowitz from the Atlantic Palace. I think the problem with the city is that all the money that we generate here, that leaves the city, the parking, the luxury tax, and the comp tax, which is around $90 million a year, and it's gonna increase with these new casinos opening. And the city should have filed a lawsuit against the state for that money to be kept here. With that money here, you wouldn't have any financial problems, like every day we wake up and this city's constantly in financial dire straits, and it shouldn't be. Because we generate more money than any other city in the state, but we're the ones that are in financial problems every day. And other things that the city council should do, the CRDA, they own over 500 properties around the city that generate zero tax revenue, but the city doesn't say a word about that. Why can't we put pressure on the CRDA to sell that? Why can't we put pressure on the state to keep the revenues that we generate in our city instead of going to the state? When you have these new casinos opening, which is going to increase the luxury tax, the parking, and the comp tax, all that money goes to the state. So locally, we don't have any incentive to draw visitors that go from 20-some million up to 30 million visitors. We're not getting any of the money. It goes to the state. So we don't have any incentive to increase tourism by dramatically increase the number of visitors, because even if we did, we would want to increase it because we would be getting the luxury tax, the parking money, the comp tax. But we don't get a penny of that. It flees our city, and we're left holding the bag. And city council, for years, hasn't done anything about it. And I'm wondering why.
Well, since you addressed council, I'm going to speak. Do you have another question? You have another question, sir?
No.
Okay, all right, you can have a seat.
Okay.
All right, and I'm gonna ask you a question. Anyone can chime in, any of my colleagues, but for years, we've been fighting the good fight. We've invited every congressman, every state assemblyman, every state senator here, not only here, to the various civic organizations around the city, and it fell on deaf ears. When we first started the negotiations for the quote partnership, then we sat across the table, and that's the very first thing that we said. I mean, you can't, get blood from a stone. We keep asking and asking and asking. The state keeps pointing to their commitment for unexpired bonds for the convention center. And excuse me, sir. Sir, excuse me.
The convention center bonds, they're paid off.
Sir, everyone respected you when you spoke, correct? And I understand the passion.
Right.
We have to, look, we're on the same team up here. It's not us against you. But I just wanted to set the record straight of what city council has done over the years, not just this council. We've always fought that fight. And I want to put on the record, and being fair, that's one of the things that we have to give Chris Christie credit for, is that he stopped the money going to North Jersey. It had to stay in Atlantic City. And not enough people talk about that, because I hear a lot of people reference that projects going on across the state. He stopped that back in 2011, so he does get credit for that. Yes.
Sonny Ireland, city resident, taxpayer. I'm a retired firefighter, so I know about the police and firefighters pension. Let me just start off with, you started off your conversation, your address saying, and we put this together and all the guys worked really hard to do it. No, you didn't. You guys pushed pencils. I can tell you what hard work is about. Ask any sanitation worker, somebody for the Department of Public Works. Ask any of the cops. These guys try to run a city for $30,000 a year. The governor said somebody down here paid $2 million, and that guy didn't do any better than they did. They work hard for a little bit of money. You should be embarrassed to say you people work hard. Well, now they got that out of the way. In 1995, The New Jersey Police and Firefighter pension was funded at 116%. You with me? Or are you going to address this later? I hope. Governors from Christine Todd Whitman on borrowed by billions, $1 billion a year, $1 billion another year. And then Governor, all the way up in McGreevy, they borrowed from our, and they never paid it back. So all this, I almost cursed. Trying to get $50 million, you owe us, I think, $5 billion. Now we're underfunded, and you're talking about taxpayers of the city are going to have to pay. They already paid. We paid. Firefighters didn't get a what do you call a buy? You don't have to pay this year. We had to pay every year. And the governor gave an excuse that certain cities wouldn't have to pay and the state wouldn't have to pay. Well, contractually, of course you have to pay. We had to pay. They didn't pay, and they borrowed money from our pension fund, and now we're funded at like 65%. And you're asking the city to pay it back. It's just, well, my question, I guess, I'm allowed to? Or did I ask one yet?
Yes.
Is it true? Just stand up here and don't mumbo jumbo so much. Just tell us, is it true that the state took our money and you're not going to pay it back, but you want the city to pay it back? Answer that question.
Sir, I think in my remarks shortly when I went through the summary, I acknowledged the fact that governors from both parties over years have dipped into the pension system. I think I was pretty clear about that. I don't doubt that for a second.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, please.
As a state employee, my pension is in more jeopardy than a local pension system. I am not here to, nor am I able to solve the systemic issues of New Jersey's pension crisis. That is an issue that the prior administration has taken up. It's an issue that faces Governor Murphy. I can only deal with the problems that I am equipped to solve, and one of them is the missed payment, the deferred payment of the city's obligations from 2015.
Next speaker, please.
I'm Seth Grossman. I'm a lawyer involved in the suit to force the city to comply with the local budget law and to oppose the casino pilot law. Now I'm a proud resident of Atlantic City again. First of all, it's hard to talk about this crisis without mentioning the political angle of the crisis. On October 12th of 2010, under Governor Christie, the state went to court, got an order from Judge Armstrong to supervise Atlantic City finances. In 2010, at that time, the city was in violation. In fact, the court order said gross violation of the local budget law. It was spending $60 to $80 million more than it was taking in. Complete violation of the law. When Governor Christie and the state took over, for the next 6 or 7 years, it continued to spend $80 million more, continued to be in gross violation of the local budget law. Budgets were supposed to be done in March and April. You were passing budgets in September and October, all under state supervision. That's how you piled up that $200 or $300 million in debt. Everything that Mr. Chiesa and Mr. Lloyd did last year to cut the spending could have, and by law should have been done in 2010, 2011, 2012. You were undoing contracts that never should have been made in the first place. So the state bears the full responsibility of what happened here. Now, why did Christie do that? We know why he did that. He was running for president and didn't want to have embarrassing stuff like Scott Walker in Wisconsin. That's why he did it. And then we had the other political angle. We had Don Guardian was running for re-election, saying he cut taxes, knowing that that $55 million was out there, and he really didn't cut taxes. Remember, we have a local budget law that says you have to have a balanced budget each year. If you don't have a balanced budget each year from some emergency, there's a procedure for city council to borrow money. What you had here, I never saw the concept deferred payment. What the heck is a deferred payment? Did council make a resolution to agree to defer a payment in violation of the budget law? Was there a written document from the state saying it's okay to pay the Wall Street bonds first, but not pay the pension and health benefits contributions where money is actually being taken out of people's paychecks? Did that happen? So I guess the first thing that happened is before you borrow money to pay this obligation, I think you owe it to the taxpayers to say, is there an obligation in the first place? In other words, where is the legal authority where the city taxpayers were committed to pay this money back and pay it back at 10% interest? Did Mayor Guardian sign a memorandum? Was it presented to council? Where's the, okay, it looks like I'm out of time.
Mr. Grossman, your time is up. Thank you.
Okay, and by the way, the final point on the casino pilot law, remember, the casinos pay fixed money, 38% pay the rest. Thank you.
Listen, we're not passing time around. Everyone has the same opportunity, and we'll do the best to get your questions answered.
Harriet
The
Diamond.
rules were laid out from the beginning. Thank you.
Harriet Diamond,
Sorry to-
city resident.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
I will ask his
We're not answering
question
any
because that was my question. I wanted to understand how the
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. You
He
didn't
took his
answer.
entire 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And remember, we said from the beginning that it's either 3 minutes, 2 questions, or which one comes first.
He can answer. You want to let him answer his question?
John?
I think, unfortunately, I'm named in a lawsuit as it relates to Mr. Grossman, so I can't comment publicly at all while I'm in litigation.
Okay. My question,
Wait a second, is the other guy going to answer?
okay.
Because these are important questions.
He represents me in that. It doesn't matter.
All right, excuse me. Can we please get back in order? Like I said, I understand everybody's passion. This is an important issue, but at the same time, there's ground rules to follow. So everyone can be heard, everyone can get the answer if it's appropriate, and we can move forward as a city. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Harriet Diamond. I'm an Atlantic City resident. I was waiting to see if my questions were asked, and they were. One was about deferring the pension. I could not understand that. And the other was, where did the 10% come from? You read a law that said that the interest rate couldn't be changed, but how did it become 10%? And I just have to echo what everybody's saying, that all our money goes to the state, and that special tax that suddenly we'll be paying off the debt. Marty, you were saying money's not leaving Atlantic City, so where has that money been going until now? Could we get an answer? So I'd like an answer to where that money's going now and how the 10% came to be.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Knight.
Ms. Diamond, I understand your question. I just don't know that I'm fully equipped to answer it. I mean, I wasn't here in the decades, that led up to this. What I can say is that the IATs over many years funded projects undertaken by CRETA. And as John Lloyd pointed out, many of those projects were not in the city of Atlantic City or even Atlantic County. Eventually, through some type of change, I don't know if it was statutory, regulatory, or just policy. I'm sorry?
S11.
Oh, it was just for projects in the city, but those monies have been going to the Atlantic City Convention Center, construction of other projects undertaken by CRETA, which I'm not particularly well versed in. But a lot of that money that is claimed to leave the city, in recent years, it's been developed, as I understand it, for projects within the city. that was the first part of your question. To the extent I'm able to answer it, admittedly, I just want to say I'm not an expert on that regard. Your second question was, where did the 10% interest rate come from? And I cited the statute. What I would say is that when that law was developed and passed by the legislature, and I'm not here to defend prior gubernatorial administrations or politicians, but factually, the statute that I cited is a pension statute. It's within Title 43 of the New Jersey statutes annotated. And it says that if a local unit fails to make a payment into the pension system, that missed payment shall accrue interest at 10% a year. I believe the specific intention was to discourage municipalities from not making that payment, therefore protecting the solvency of the local pension system. I fully understand, and as a state employee, I fully appreciate the fact that prior gubernatorial administrations have made a mockery of that as it relates to the state pension plan. But at least when it came to the local pension plan, they put in a high interest rate to discourage towns from not making payments. Atlantic City is one financially troubled municipality, but it's not the only one. Patterson is in very dire straits. Camden has been in straits. Trenton, even Newark. If the interest rate set forth legislatively was so low, it would potentially, I don't want to say encourage, but it wouldn't discourage those towns from failing to make their pensions. So Title 43 is where that statutory site comes from.
Mr. Cunningham, before you sit down, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
As far as the pension goes, the contributions towards the pension, you have the employers that make a 10% contribution, as well as the city has to make its portion, two separate contributions to the pension fund. When the employees made their contributions and the money was taken out of their checks, was that money held back, or was that money sent into the pension system so that it could go to work into Wall Street stocks and bonds and things like that? I understand the city's portion definitely was never paid.
Yeah, that was submitted, as I understand it, yes.
So the employees' money
Yes.
went into the system
Yes.
and went to work?
Yes.
Okay.
Council President, I had a question as well, Mr. Cunningham. Was there ever a written agreement when 2015 came around, this infamous time when we decided to skip these payments? Was there ever any type of written agreement, whether it's between the city and the state, or the state and the state, in the form of the emergency manager and your department? Like, did anybody ever put to writing the authority for this agreement?
I would say the authority comes from your budget document. The city adopted a budget. Well, the city introduced a budget, the local finance board ultimately adopted the budget. That budget document had the deferred payment, and so that to me would be the, if you're looking for somewhere that shows that record, I would point to the budget document.
I mean, this has been very educational tonight, but like, I'm curious, like, as part of that budget process, I mean, was there ever an analysis done to show, I mean, I hear you saying it was the best option, it was the only option, it's the same thing that's being said today about this option, which is an option, there are other options, but like, was there ever any type of analysis about what the impact of this would be? Like, were our decision makers aware of the 10% punitive interest at the time? I mean, were there ever any tangible documents done on the analysis side?
I don't know if there were, I don't know if I could produce documents, but as part of the budget process, it was a fairly easy analysis. The city did not have enough money, not just to balance its budget, the city did not have enough money to pay its bills. It simply didn't. There were days, and I sat with the mayor and other consultants that the state brought in, and we showed a graph that showed the liquidity crisis. It's one thing to come up with a balanced budget, it's another to make payroll. And there were periods based upon when the city receives money, through tax payments as an example, and when other large obligations are due and owing. When the emergency manager, Kevin Lavin, was in place, I think the clear analysis was there was not enough money to pay bills. What bill could not be paid that would have a significant impact? I believe that is really the answer to your question. I don't think I could produce a tangible document at this point, though, to say, you know, here's where it factored in. I think it was just a, you know, an ongoing process.
And
Having nothing to do with you, there was enough money to probably make payroll according to Kevin Lappin, right? But it was enough money to pay him. Not saying you. Not saying you.
Councilman, it's a difficult position, you know, I'm in. But what I would say is that the expenses of Mr. Lavin, as the expenses of the firm Ernst & Young, the expenses of the CSG law firm, they've all been paid by the state. They were not expenses of the city. I was asked here last council meeting how much the city has paid me. The answer is the city has paid me nothing. I am a state employee. Mr. Lavin and those consultants were paid through the Attorney General's office by the state of New Jersey, not by the city of Atlantic City.
But the question to it is, I've seen you explain what you're trying to do. I never seen him explain what he tried to do. Didn't do.
Councilman, I can only speak for myself.
And to echo the statements about the liquidity crisis and how real it was during the state takeover battle, we remember where it was meetings here and in the community when it was explained that the city employees were either going to get laid off or volunteer. And I'm never going to forget the sight of the dry erase board in the business administrator's office with all kind of graphs and charts of, okay, well, we have to wait for the taxes to get paid, for payroll to come. We're going to run out of money in July. And like I said, to be where we were and to be where we're heading, I think we're in a good position moving forward. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, everyone. Henry Green. The question I have is, if we don't do this particular bond, you said that $16 million were incurred to the residents. Would that same incurrence, would the casino be charged with that same responsibility, or just the residents?
Just the residents.
Okay. The other thing is IATs.
And if I could just be a little more particular. I had made the comment that the legislation talked about these IATs, these redirected casino payments being used for debt service. Therefore, if we take that 1/5, we take that $60 million and I put it in the budget and it's not a bond, I can't use those IATs to pay that money. That's why we developed this structure as we did.
So you're saying if you get the $130 million, the money for IATs is going to go down?
I'm not sure I understand the question. What I'm saying is, right now, this obligation, a large portion of this obligation is accruing at a statutory 10% interest rate.
Okay.
By issuing a bond to pay it, it stops that interest from accruing. What I would describe it as, and I'm very reluctant to when we talk about public finance, to use the credit card analogy. It's much more like a mortgage, but I will use the credit card analogy. City has a credit card, and whether or not people think that should have been charged up, I can't control that. The city right now has a large balance on a credit card that's charging 10% interest. We have a solution where we can pay that 10% interest off with a 4% credit card. But the 4% credit card is going to get paid with IATs as opposed to tax dollars. That's the best analogy I could offer you.
No, I understand you. I got
Okay.
you on that. The IATs, it just wasn't clear, or I don't know if everyone else was clear on actually how IATs have been used in the past and the type of stuff that IATs were used for. And I'm not sure if I'm thinking it's the same thing or not, but like it's supposed to be, like we wanted a recreation center in our community. If we wanted all of these other different things with development in our communities, these types of things. Now, they haven't been doing that. They've been giving the money to the casinos, and I understand exactly what you're saying. They've been giving that for them to build up their facades and all the other stuff, and giving the casinos for different type of expansions and conference rooms and all that other type of stuff. That's where the money's been going, instead of actually going to the people in the city, developing those types of things in the first place. So we might as well use it then to pay off our debt, because they've been using it anyway.
I'm not an expert in what it's going. I'm not a CRETA expert. I cannot tell you where all the things that money is going to.
But will we be able to use those IATs after we pay off our debt? Will that money come back to Atlantic City?
Questions already. Did, wanna ask a question?
John, I think we should just answer that quickly if we
Well,
could.
I mean, what it was before, I think if it's not clear, I think everybody has answered it themselves, just what it was used for. The gentleman just spoke clearly about a couple of things. Once the development projects were more Atlantic City centric, right, full Atlantic City, but prior to the redirection, the stream of money was used to finance through bonds, debt service, pay off bonds issued by CREDA for projects. Formerly some initially within the city completely, then throughout the state, county, then shifted through with other legislative amendments to be more Atlantic City centered. What they were used for, you mentioned a couple of was accurate. After the Pilot Act expires in 2026, absent any other legislation or any other legislative change, what is to be done with IAT payments, it would return to the same thing, debt service. It is a legislative choice, which can be done and effected through the democratic process to suggest amendments and changes to that. But that's...
You said debt service in 26, when it expires, it goes back to the project? What happens?
What will happen in 26 when it expires, the stream of money will still come in and be available for debt service for CREDA projects, absent any other legislative changes.
That's what,
Right.
But while it's available to the city, we're maximizing it to
While
for use.
it's available to the city, it's basically,
so it goes back to CREDA.
it effectively back to CREDA, absent legislative change. I'm going to urge that. I'm going to stay on that point because if this is an issue you guys were talking about. That's part of what would be subject to the democratic process and the statutory amendment. So it's speculative. But right now, the operation of the law is that stream, that income stream, is to be used for the city to retire debt, and not just this debt, not at all just this debt. You know, the way this has been set up is to have it go after all debt. Primarily qualified debt first, right? But beyond that, if available.
Thank you.
Council President, I just wanted to get some clarification. Forgive me one second. I just wanted to get some clarifications on some things. Now, we've been throwing away around the concept of IATs and debt services. Just to be certain, I need some more clarification as far as the debt services concept. So we're throwing around a concept or a title that misunderstood might be. Debt services, and please correct me if I'm wrong, professional services fall under debt services? Say a law firm like Chiesa comes in and charges the city $6.5 million or whatever, just as hypothetical, not being specific. Does this debt service, is that considered debt service and an IET would be paid?
Councilman, debt service means principal and interest on bonds. That's
On bonds?
On bonds.
Okay. Bonds that were suggested by individuals that may be working through those contracts, is that the case?
On any bonds that are authorized by the city.
Okay, the reason I'm asking.
Council authorizes.
Right, the reason I'm asking is sometimes we empower an entity to move on our behalf, but we also accumulate some debt with that. Legal, lawyers, analysis getting done, statistics, all the different services that apparently are comprised of this in court, and all that's compounded on top of it. All of those individuals are working class people. I can say, forgive me, wrong term. All those individuals are employed by some of these companies. If in essence they weren't there, we wouldn't have that debt, I would think. So it looks to me, and forgive me, and this is just looking, there's a lot of hookups being made. Just like Senator Chiesa coming in and doing what he did, that was a hookup for Christie. It continues to look as if this is a long-term issue trying to be addressed now, trickle down into now, because we understand prior governors tapped into it. We understand that, if I could be mistaken, maybe the number's wrong, Christie took out $300 million and donated into the stock market, and all of a sudden it vanished and never came back into the punching system. I could be mistaken, it could be mixed up, I'm getting older. And then, right. As we're going into, now moving into this concept where we're trying to address this, and then there's a question of interest rate from 2% to 10%. We understand that 10% was something that was already predetermined legislatively, but yet was moved even though a legislation was already determined and already understood. It was still moved to avoid or work against that legislation. So with all that being said, I think there's a couple issues, a couple legal issues that we have to tackle, so we're certain. In addition to, I still say the same thing. As Mr. Allen so poignantly said, and I appreciate your statement, Mr. Allen, a lot of money has been funneled from the state wise, from the city, in different aspects. And what we're doing is, it looks like we're paying the services that feed the engine, the economic engine of politics. And we're utilizing these mechanisms that are created by the governing body, which is political. They create legislation to address an issue that took place. So in other words, they make a bad choice, then they legislate someone else to take care of that bad choice. And then, knowing something may be coming, create another legislation to help avoid, detract who would be responsible for, and making the economic engine of Atlantic City pay for something. So I'm all over the place, and forgive me, I don't mean to. But this sounds fishy to me. And I'm next to the ocean, so you never know. Yeah. You never know.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Council President, I'm simply not sure I understand.
That could be it. Forgive me.
You've mentioned Senator Kaye's law firm's bills.
Mm-hmm.
They're not part and parcel of this issue. They're not being funded by this bond issue. This bond issue is simply being used to take casino available IATs and pay a deferred pension and healthcare obligation. There will be some cost of issuance associated with the deal. The bond counsel and financial advisor, there's printers, there's things that are normally associated with a bond deal, but I'm not understanding the nexus. I understand your dissatisfaction with Senator Kaye's bills, but they were paid by the state of New Jersey and are not included in part of this bond deal. And it seemed to me that again, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, Councilman, but I just maybe didn't fully follow it.
No, please. And I don't mean to go to tay-to-tay. It's just in the situation I'm trying to cover various points, and as we understand, bureaucracy sometimes gets lost. Words sometimes are utilized to mask certain truths. But the honest truth is, we have so many agencies. I'm still trying to figure out how does the DGE, Department of Gaming Enforcement for the state police officers, arrange the IAT system in some which way, or find out what numbers there are. Last time I checked, there's no accountants in the state police, and this might be something new to me. I could be, okay, that's fine. This is something new. I've never thought that the DGE, which is state police officers, assigned for regulation in gaming to, it sounds to me like
they're not all. The Division of Gaming Enforcement employs many people that are not state troopers. They have professionals, accountants and other professionals. They actually are separate than the state police. They are a division within the Attorney General's office, and they are accountants and other professionals.
Yeah, okay, right. I understand, because I remember with legislation. I don't mean to take up much more time. I just wanted to just touch. It's just various angles. Like, I didn't know that. And we talked about an independent bank earlier that might be working with us with a bond. Is there a name for the bank? I still don't know an independent bank without a name. I'd like to know what the bank is.
Go out for bid?
I don't know. I don't know what the bank is, because we understand there's a lot of individuals that might be involved with banks and banking in the system itself and the mechanism.
It's the same bank that you've used for all of your existing clubs like bond deals. If you had picked another bank, it would have been more expensive.
So that's not independent. Something that's already established.
Well, but there was also a solicitation put out, and the rates factored into that decision. So it wasn't like hey, I picked PNC Bank or Core States Bank. Well, I'm showing my age. There was proposals sought from financial institutions to serve as the underwriter on the deal.
Okay. And this is something that's already, the individual, the bank itself has already been contracted through us and used before?
Yeah, correct.
All right, so we already had that relationship?
Correct.
Okay, so there's...
And Councilman, just to further make the point, there's synergy that comes with that. When you have an underwriter that has already worked through an offering statement and knows the city, they have a better understanding, so it should go faster, smoother, and cheaper.
I definitely appreciate that, because I can recall when we were talking independently before the state came in, how we were thinking about going to bond, and we was told by the state, it would be horrible for you to go out bond, the bond market is terrible. And then within a week's time, as the state took over, they went into bond and automatically popped up with a favorable number and direction. So I understand how the bond market
Councilman,
is
I have to address that point.
Okay.
The city simply did not have access to the bond market. Your credit rating, there was junk, and then there was Atlantic City down here. The only way the city of Atlantic City accessed the debt market was because the state of New Jersey provided Comtra for the first time ever, which allowed the city to go through the Qualified Bond Act, and that is the only reason why the city accessed the market and accessed it at a very accessible interest rate. It was that initial commitment of Comtra from the Division of Local Government Services to the city of Atlantic City. The city could not have accessed the capital markets.
I took note of that on the slide, and the phrase you used was the increase in qualified revenue was given to float, or I'm using the term float, but the increase in qualified revenue was used in order to prepare the bonds, or whatever that, the word, the verb was there, but float, whatever, to make bonds possible. It's interesting that the state decides to increase our revenue in order to create a bond. You guys do this work here since 2015, you make some deals, you free up some money. The plan of action always is, let's go get another bond. The projections of IATs tonight, which you showed on the graph, will cover, and we have so much in IAT revenue that we're swimming in it in a few years. And rather than give the taxpayers that type of confidence that, you know what, we've got a revenue stream for it, and what happens when the projections go wrong? So right now we're projecting they're gonna go up, but like, what if any one of those calculations is wrong? The one thing that's sure is this debt schedule. And it just seems like it's always the answer for everything.
No, Councilman, here's what's sure. If you don't issue the bonds, you will have a $16 million increase to your budget every year for the next 5 years. So a lot of the comments that I've heard tonight are things that we'd like to do. Every single option that I heard would require state legislative change. This group is not tasked with state legislative change. You might be, and some of those might be great ideas, and it's not our business to tell you to do them or not do them. That's between you and the electorate. But we are charged with, you have obligations due, they're existing, and within the existing statutory framework, what's the best alternative? Is it perfect? No. Is it great? No. Projections could be off? Sure. But what is your alternative? Your alternative is, it goes into the debt, it goes in the budget, and you're gonna have to raise taxes. So we came up with a way to minimize that obligation by transferring it, if you will, to the casinos. Not perfect, but again, all we can do is work within the existing statutory framework.
The only piece I want to take issue with, and this is
Please.
factually, is that you and Mr. Cunningham keep on mentioning if we don't do this, there's going to be a tax increase. Like, in order to get to the point where, again, and I love things written on paper, where we can look on paper and look at option A and option B and option C and what the real impact is to the taxpayers in this town that aren't casinos. It's a variable that you're basing all your projections on. And when I say the variable, it's what state aid is going to be. There's been no 5-year commitment of what state aid is going to be for 5 years, so that way we can do stable budgeting and make real, I don't want to say fear tactics, but it is fearful. Like, nobody wants a tax increase. And like, that's the whole vehemence here. It just seems that the variable of what state aid is going to be, I don't know how anybody can get up and say there's going to be a tax increase of XYZ when it's a variable.
You are correct that if you were to find $16 million of things in the budget now that you could replace with this $16 million, you're right, that could result in a zero tax increase. But then you would have to take $16 million of things that are in your budget now and get rid of them. I don't know what they are, I'm not a budget expert, it's not my job. That's all I'm saying, is that it is a $16 million bill, it's due now, what do you do? Literally, that's what we're saying. Yeah, we're not the budget guys, that's up to you.
Next, we have Ms. Ruffield.
Sorry, yeah, no, forgive me.
Okay, I think about just what I heard just now has a lot to do with what problems we as the residents, the taxpayers are having in the wording that says the city owes this, the city deferred this, the city has this, The city has that. The city has not been able to make a financial decision since 2000 what? 10? Okay, so when we say we'd like to see documents that were signed that said we, the city, want to defer the health and pension payments. We didn't say it, the state said it. So that was a state mandate that they decided they were going to defer these. So, okay, 2% on the health, but I think what's really bothering us is that the state would create a statute or whatever it is saying, okay, well then we're going to charge them 10% interest, like they just pulled that out of the air. It was, and nobody saw anything signed by anybody. The legislators in Trenton made this decision to do this, to hit us with a 10% interest rate, which I think is what's bothering most of us. The city didn't say, let's defer it. The state made us defer it or advised us to defer it and then want to charge us 10% interest. When we're trying to get out of debt, why would we have to pay 10% interest? I think if anything could be accomplished by the new, by Murphy and Ms. Oliver, is to do something about that 10%. Just say, we forgive you the 10% or we'll put it down to 2%. And if it takes a change in the law, then that's something we all get together and we have to do. Because that 10% was really, I think, what's bothering people the most. And the fact that there isn't any documents to say, and that you can't keep saying, the city owes it because you deferred it. The city didn't defer it, the state deferred it. So I don't have a question, that's just a feeling that we have.
Council President, just a quick second. I'm not going to take much. Is it okay? All right. I commend, first off, ladies and gentlemen, working for the state itself. I appreciate your efforts and all those trying to work miracles with what you have. I understand the premise of having to do what your boss tells you per se. It may not look advantageous to us as a city residents and leaders of the city-wise to do so, and that's why we're going to combat and always ask questions. We are charged to do so because this is what people ask us to do, it's what we're elected to do. So it's not about a loss of respect. We respect what you do, but we're going to continuously ask questions at every avenue we possibly can, because there could be a situation where we see something that could come to an advantage to us, and this is what we need to find. Instead of paying stock markets as often as we have, as them being a primary focus for future bonds and potential bonds in the future, we were looking to pay the bills that we needed to ensure that our salaries and wages, the people who it directly impacts. This was more of a higher priority than bonds, but we understand in hindsight what your motivations were for future bonds because you saw debts coming up. I don't necessarily agree that some of these debts should have taken place. I highly disagree on some of these situations, but of course, that's only my opinion. But I do agree, like Ms. Ruffy had mentioned, maybe we should campaign our legislators to see what we can do to waive that 10%, because this is the most extraordinary situation ever happening to any one city of its kind in the history of the state of New Jersey, and also how it impacts the state economy. That's something would be an advantageous move on the legislators to help support, being that a lot of the actions that were taken that's impacting the city was taken by state legislators and how it trickled our city. For example, the reason why we can't get some of the monies that were due to us, like the room tax and luxury taxes, because we were told, one of the senators told us that they had just bonded out for renovations of the Boardwalk Hall. And that's why, because they had obligations that were set up. So every time it seems like we had an opportunity for us to pull the funds back in, they bonded out to get light bulbs and rugs, to continue to have that chain of communication, that obligation. So that's just a point, that's just an example. But thank you, gentlemen, thank you. Sorry.
And I'm going to ask my colleagues to just, hold comments until the end so we can get to the public. We want to take notes and all that. Go ahead, Mr. Young, you're up.
Forgive me.
Steve Young. First I want to say, it's very embarrassing for the state to say that we don't pay them when everyone in this room probably pays city taxes, county taxes, state taxes, and federal taxes. So we do indirectly pay all of those professional services that we cannot vote on. Second of all, you know, the statement about what happens if the city, the council, and the mayor do not vote on these things. I mean, you take away our sovereignty and our votes. You say you can veto everything. Then you say no collective bargaining, you can't hire and fire. But then you're gonna say, well, you have to approve this bond ordinance or else. I mean, that's kind of hypocritical to say you have to do something, but your vote don't count. Now, either our vote count or it don't. We need to really talk about getting there. Question. How can you talk about a proposed 2018 budget and you're talking about approving an ordinance first to pay back the money? It's just working backwards. You get a proposed budget first to say how much you're going to pay back, I would think, unless you're bankrupt and don't know what you're doing. And those type of things about an assessment to find out how much money is there, how much we do owe to the dollar and cents, we need to really think about looking into that. I mean, we could have had a bankruptcy judge to tell you who the money goes to first and who you should pay off first. That's what they do about that. So let's start researching some issues on that. The other thing is, you know, again, if the pilot program, if it's being challenged in court, and these monies are not given to the city to off-pay the debt, what is your backup plan? Because if you don't get the IET money, what happens next? And stop threatening the taxpayers saying that we're gonna have to pay. I mean, that's a big threat to the people that's been paying all these taxes all these years, especially the property owners here. We've been through enough. So stop threatening us with more, saying we gotta pay more debt, or $700 something gonna be added to us more in our property tax. Stop that. I mean, and like Ms. Ruff, said, if you wanna spend money, don't spend money on these professionals from the state. Spend money on the legislators to change the legislation so the dollars can stay here. That's all. That's the solution.
You want to answer his questions?
The state pays. Remember, I had 1, 2, and 3. First bucket was IAT. Second bucket was state qualified bonds, qualified aid, state aid from the state pays. Third are the taxpayers. All three secure the bonds, but there is an order. It's a contract. You can list the order, and the order is casino tax first, state aid second, taxpayer third. Sorry?
No backup.
Jeff Rosenberger, resident and taxpayer. I kind of am getting the consensus with the room that taking a credit card to pay off another credit card, we're concerned. CRDA and the bond issue, that bond was floated years ago and it was dedicated to that fund. But I don't see any of the council people in the CRDA meetings. I see you there. I've seen Steve Young there. I've seen some of the residents there. But these people are running our city. I have one question. Why haven't we filed suit? That follows Seth Grossman's question. It follows what Tom Forkin's been preaching for years on civil rights, on violations of the laws Seth has grossed. Why haven't we filed suit? Thank you. There's no answer from anyone?
Why not?
Excuse me, Mr. Rosenberg, excuse me. You didn't hear me saying, and talking to him, we can't answer that. We have legal counsel to answer that. And I was talking to him on the side to find out what was the answer. I'm gonna let either the Solicitor Swan or Tarver answer that question.
Thank you.
Well, I can just simply say that, you know, as an attorney who has tried all types of cases, federal and otherwise, and civil rights cases, we have explored and attempted to find violations of federal law under which we can base a federal lawsuit. We've not been able to determine that there is a violation of federal law, and therefore, we've not been able to determine that a suit would be appropriate. If someone is able to present the basis for a federal lawsuit, as you're claiming, and as Mr. Forgan has claimed all along, be happy to explore it, be happy to discuss it. But that has not been the case thus far, at least in my opinion.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Council President, council members, and Mayor. Just so I understand you clearly, are you saying tonight that Governor Murphy and Lieutenant Governor Oliver authorized you to proceed with your presentation tonight? That they are in agreement? Because I heard you say administration, but you did not call names. So were they the two people that authorized you to proceed with your presentation tonight? And in what year, in lieu of Black History Month, in what year will Atlantic City be released from bondage?
Ms. Molyneux, I spoke to the Lieutenant Governor and asked the question that the council members requested I ask, which is, would the deferred pension healthcare liability be forgiven by the state? The answer was no. Therefore, we continued to craft a solution that developed repayment for that. That is the conversation I had, and as far as the second question you asked, I'm certainly not equipped to answer that.
Alma Johnson, tired taxpayer of Atlantic City. I feel like we're playing Ring Around the Rosie. You started that end, you go around, and you come back to where you started from. Long time ago, I think I told everybody, some that are not here tonight, some who have died, that we have been raped. They're still doing it. I don't think it's nothing we can really do but pay our taxes until we die or move out of Atlantic City. Because we put these state people in there. I didn't really vote for Christie, I'll tell you that right now. But through the years, we have put people in office who we let do this because we weren't knowledgeable. We didn't come out. I've learned as I'm going along. But I also know that the whole country's in trouble, not just Atlantic City, and there isn't too much we can do about it, but vote them out when we can. And I don't mean you guys. I know you're up against a rock and a hard place, because I told you a long time ago. Hope you didn't take the hot seat. You remember? Didn't I tell you that? And I'm going on that note.
Clean Amid Social Club. Just can you please clarify the original amount that was owed, the amount that is owed in interest, and then the amount that is going to be paid in fees to complete this transaction over 5 years?
I'm going to need some help from the financial advisor to answer that question. I want to make sure we answer it accurately. The original deferment was comprised of two parts. Number one was the deferred state health benefit payment in the amount of $20.3 million. The second was the deferred public employee retirement system and police and fire retirement system pension funding in the amount of 18.6. There had been some accrued interest up until that point. prior to, the non-payment, which amounted to $37.2 million. That $37.2 million was 1 year's obligation for the pension and health care of the city. Those payments were not made. That has grown now to, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, $47.1 million.
That's as of the end of this year. So if the end of 18, if the interest continues to accrue, it will be 47.1 million. So if you were to pay off in March, it's actually $2 million less. So it would be about 45 million if you're paying it off in March or April.
And I should just want to be clear, by issuing this bond to be paid for using the IAT funds, it stops that interest from continuing to accrue. I might not have been clear enough on that benefit of this proposed transaction.
Next speaker, please.
Paid by IATs, which can't be used for anything but debt service.
I'm sorry, I don't want to lose my 3 minutes. Good evening. I'm going to turn my back to y'all because I need to talk to the public just to give us some understanding. I don't come from a background of accountants and lawyers, but I was a businessman, legally and illegally in my life. And I've dealt with millions of dollars. So millions don't scare me. Those who know me, we dealt with millions. And I want to give you something to write down. Whoever does not learn from history is bound to repeat it. Keep that as a rule. If we look at what we're dealing with here, we elected officials, and they don't run our government. The state runs our government. And we had, in another life, the lawyer would tell you, take the plea bargain. And we would say to the lawyer, you're not doing this time, I am. Don't just give me a plea bargain. I need to understand what's happening. This is a plea bargain they're offering us. We're going to save you money. They're not going to do the time because they don't live here. We're going to do it. We're going to pay the taxes. We're going to pay the burden. So they're giving us all these fancy terms. IAT, ACA, state loan. They got all these terms to use it. It's money. Question you got to understand. Is that money that we've received that supposed to come from the casinos and given to the state, then diverted back to Atlantic City? We have never received in our accounts none of that money for 2016 or 2017. And what they do is they make more debt, they take that money and they pay that debt. What do? They make more debt and take the money to pay the debt. So something that got swept under the rug was the $73 million 2016 bridge loan. The money from the IAT, the ACA from 2016 and 17 was $60 million. 13.5 was 2017 of the IATs. That money, those IAT money went to pay off that debt that they gave us. It never paid down debt service. They have over the projected 10 years, and I gotta hurry up, $300 million. I believe, and we can get them to show us, that the state is here to take that $300 million and leave us with that debt service. The way we stop it is that we have public hearings where they don't control it. We get together, we do the research, and then my question is, has ever the AITs that we received in 2016 and 2017, has it been used to pay that bridge loan? Thank you.
State aid. We paid that off with the increased state.
But not through IATs.
No, through IATs, no.
I just want to make sure I answer the question correctly.
To sum up the question, Tim, he just wants to know what funding sources were used to pay off the bridge loan.
Sure. The IATs, and this is why I just want to check, the IATs didn't become available through the redirection until 2017, correct, John, legislatively? So we haven't done anything with those monies. They weren't available.
Say it again.
Secondly, the redirected ACA money, the Atlantic City Alliance money that previously the casinos paid into a fund, and that fund went into a marketing group that kind of collectively spent money to promote the city of Atlantic City. The most obvious example, the Do AC ad campaign. That was the Atlantic City Alliance. Those monies were redirected through the city. The state loaned money to get you through a liquidity crisis. The state repaid that money. The state hasn't. Well, I'll leave the answer at that, Council President. I don't know what else I could say.
All right. Anyone else from the public like to speak? You already spoke. No disrespect. You have to come up and speak on the record.
My name's Misha Alkayal. I'm a pretty new resident of Atlantic City. The word of the day, I think, is dizzy. We have this pretty peach chart. I'm hearing they're taking 90 million from us, bragging about giving us 20 million. This is a way, and how much of that 20 million is going to continue to flow when we get to utilize the IAT money that belonged to us in the first place? So for me, and I'm not an accountant, this just looks like a way to keep us under the state's thumb so that they can keep dipping into our pot forever. Forever.
With great respect, I disagree wholeheartedly. I think this is the exact opposite. I think this is a solution for the city of Atlantic City's financial woes, which will hopefully right the ship and get the state out of the business of being in Atlantic City. The state legislature only recently passed a law allowing these IATs to be used for debt service. I have tried to come up with the professionals for a solution that maximizes the amount of debt service that can be paid so that these obligations don't have to go into the budget of the city of Atlantic City. I'll be here tonight after this meeting ends. If someone else has a solution to pay back the pension and healthcare deferred payments without issuing debt and without putting it in the city budget, I am all ears. I would love to hear that solution. I would love to come up with a perfect solution, but I've come up with a solution that I think will put Atlantic City on better footing and hopefully allow you to regain the control that you clearly deserve and desire.
Are there any more public speakers? Seeing none?
I'm John Varela. I'm Local 198, the Firefighters Association president. Just want to let you guys know our lawsuit in front of Judge Mendez is for you guys. We fought the constitutionality of this bill. We fought the fact they took your right away to your elected officials, and we continue to fight. So I just want you guys to know that a lot of the information that Tom Forkins put out there, we fought that in front of the judge. We're still going through it, and we're going to continue to fight. I'm a little nervous, excuse me. My question, we brought $40 million in SAFER grants to Atlantic City since 2008. The money in those SAFER funds goes to the health and pension payments. Is any of that money involved in the $55 million that's supposed to be paid back?
I don't know that I know the answer. Any employee contributions have been paid to the state.
Not employee, the SAFER funds took into account the city's portion as well.
So if
I only know the SAFER grant as
right.
contributing to the city to offset labor costs. I'm not.
Right. So the city's paid its pension obligation every year but 2015. Every year, the city has paid the state the employee contributions. So your question is, any part of SAFER that reimbursed for pension of the city's costs in 2015, that has not been paid.
So where's that money at?
public? Seeing none? No, there's no more questions. Yeah. We'd like to thank everyone for coming out. We're going to hold more public hearings like this on major issues like this for the public. We will be voting on this issue next Wednesday at our council meeting. Listen, with all the options that are, being on the table, and I believe in being forthright and transparent, and instead of raising taxes, on the residents. I mean, I know we could say that, it's a scare tactic, but, it's real, especially with the Atlantic City taxpayer went through. And what you have to realize, like I said, it's not us versus y'all. We in the same boat. Just because we sit up here from end to end doesn't mean that, we don't pay taxes. It's not a perk that because you're an elected official, you don't have to pay taxes. So what affects you affects us. And like I said, difficult decisions have to be made. But at the same time, that's why you elect us to make these difficult and sometimes unpopular decisions, and we have to stand. Me personally, I'm going to vote for it. I'm not going to vote to put a tax increase north of $787 per person, when we can bond it and we can use resources that were allocated through state legislation to get this done. Listen, nothing is perfect. If this was perfect, we wouldn't be here today. And this was a very constructive debate. It was an educational process that we need to do more of as a community. So with that being said, if none of my colleagues have anything to say, I'm going to call for an adjournment of this public hearing, and I thank everybody for coming out.